Some walk among us with a quiet certainty, though they may not yet understand why. They feel it a tug in the depths of their being, an inkling that whispers, "You were meant for something more." These are the chosen ones, not by any merit of their own, nor by the world's estimation, but by a calling older than time itself. History is rich with such figures: Moses, who trembled before the burning bush; Esther, who stood alone before a king; even the lowly shepherd boy David, whose hands would one day hold a king's scepter. They did not seek greatness or wish for the burdens placed upon them. And yet, in the hour of need, they rose. To be chosen is not to be exalted, but to be set apart for a task most would shrink from. It is a journey fraught with trial, loneliness, and misunderstanding. But it is also the only path that leads to true purpose. The chosen ones are feared for their divine calling. Many are called, but few are chosen. Matthew 22:14. Elijah had always known he was different, not by his choosing, but by a calling that had weighed upon him since childhood. It was not a burden of sorrow, but a fire aflame that neither consumed him nor let him rest. He had seen visions of a great city descending from the heavens, had heard whispers of wisdom that no man had spoken, and had felt the weight of an unseen hand guiding his steps. Yet for all this, he was feared. The townspeople whispered when he passed, their voices like dry leaves rustling in secret. Some called him blessed, others cursed. They saw his unwavering faith and inexplicable knowledge of things yet to come, unsettling them. His very existence was a challenge to the comfortable indifference in which they had wrapped themselves. One evening, as Elijah walked through the market square, a man named Joram, one of the village elders, approached him with a thin smile. "Elijah," he said, his voice measured, "there are many rumors about you. Some say you are a prophet. Others say you are dangerous." Elijah met his gaze without fear. "Do you ask because you seek the truth, or because you fear it?" Joram's smile faltered. "We fear what we do not understand. If you are chosen, as you say, why would God choose you and not another?" Elijah did not answer at once. Instead, he looked past Joram at the crowd that had gathered, drawn by the tension in the air. Their expressions were mixed: curiosity, doubt, reverence, suspicion. "The calling of God is not given as a reward, nor as a punishment," Elijah finally said. "It is given according to his will. Many are called, but few are chosen. Not because he loves some more than others, but because few will bear the cost." A murmur spread through the crowd. Joram frowned. "And what cost is that?" Elijah's voice was steady. "To be chosen is to walk a road that others fear. It is to carry light into darkness, knowing the darkness will hate it. It is to speak truth where lies are loved. It is to be set apart, not for one's own sake, but for the sake of him who calls." The people shifted uneasily. A woman clutched her child closer. A merchant, who had profited from deceit, turned away as though the words burned him. Joram crossed his arms. "Then tell me, Elijah, do you not fear? If what you say is true, then your path will not lead to comfort, but to suffering." For the first time, Elijah smiled. "Fear? Yes, I feel it. But fear does not rule me. I walk in the footsteps of those who have gone before: the prophets, the martyrs, the ones who spoke when the world would rather silence them. If they suffered, so shall I, but I do not walk alone." A silence fell over the square. Some turned away, unwilling to hear more. Others lingered, their hearts stirring with something they could not name. Joram stared at Elijah for a long moment before finally shaking his head. "You are either a fool or a man of God." Elijah did not answer. He simply turned and walked away, leaving the choice to them. That night, as he looked at the sky, he whispered a prayer not for himself, but for those who had heard. The burden of the chosen was heavy, but it was not without purpose. And though he was feared, he knew this too was part of the calling. For many are called, but few are chosen. The unshakable confidence of the chosen. A young man named Elias lived in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and silver rivers. He was not remarkable in appearance or born into wealth or privilege. Yet there was something about him that unsettled those around him. He walked with a quiet confidence, as if he knew a truth that others could not grasp. The elders of the village whispered among themselves, "He does not seek our approval nor conform to our ways." "There is something different about him," they said. The merchants eyed him warily, for he did not barter with desperation but with certainty, as if he already possessed more than what could be seen. Even the young men of the village, who sought status and admiration, found his presence unnerving. He did not strive to prove himself, and because of that, they found themselves feeling smaller in his shadow. One day, an old teacher named Samuel approached Elias as he sat by the river's edge. "You do not seek the things others seek. You do not hunger for their approval. Tell me, young man, what is it that anchors you?" Elias turned to the teacher with a knowing smile. "I walk in the confidence of my Creator. My worth is not measured by the standards of men, but by the calling placed upon me from above. That is why their opinions shift like the wind, but I remain unmoved." Samuel nodded, a gleam of understanding in his eyes. "Ah, you have found the secret that many fear. People distrust what they cannot control. A man who seeks validation can be swayed, but one who stands firm in his identity is beyond manipulation." As time passed, Elias's quiet strength only grew. The village continued to misunderstand him. Some envied his peace, while others resented it. "Who does he think he is?" they murmured. "He does not bow to our customs, yet lacks joy nor purpose." But no amount of whispers or judgment could shake him, for his foundation was not built on the shifting sands of human opinion. One evening, as the sky burned with the setting sun's colors, a group of men approached Elias with heavy hearts. They had spent years chasing approval, shaping themselves to fit expectations, only to find themselves weary and lost. Elias, one of them, said, "We have done all that was asked of us. We have sought honor, respect, and the admiration of men. Yet we are restless. Tell us, where does your peace come from?" Elias looked at them with kindness. "True confidence does not come from the applause of men, nor the fleeting treasures of this world. It comes from knowing who you are in the eyes of God, when you are chosen. You do not need permission to walk in the path set before you. You do not bend to the expectations of those who do not see what you see." The men listened silently, for his words struck a chord deep within them. They had spent their lives trying to build themselves in the reflections of others, only to realize that those reflections were ever changing, never satisfied. "What must we do?" one asked. Elias smiled. "Do not be afraid to walk alone. Do not seek to fit where you were never meant to belong. Stand firm, knowing that the one who called you is greater than the voices questioning you. When you no longer need the world's approval, you will find a freedom they cannot understand." As the village lights flickered under the vast heavens that night, some men began their journey toward unshakable confidence. And though the world did not understand them, they were no longer afraid. They had seen the truth that those chosen cannot be controlled, for they belong to something far greater than the world itself: the gift of sight. The sun had long set, and the village of Kedar lay bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. But beyond the flickering light, in the depths of the olive groves, a young man named Elias sat in quiet meditation. He had always known he was different. While others took the world at face value, he saw through it beyond words, beyond gestures, beyond even the facades people so carefully crafted. He saw the hidden, the veiled, the things few dared to acknowledge. His grandfather, an old prophet, once told him, "The chosen ones see past illusions. They recognize the truths hidden from most that lie beneath the surface like pearls buried in the deep. But beware, my son, for those who weave deception will fear you." One evening, as Elias wandered through the market square, he encountered a merchant peddling what he claimed to be rare and enchanted relics. The villagers flocked to him, eager to purchase his wares, each convinced they had stumbled upon some great treasure. Elias, however, saw what others did not: the shadow flickering behind the merchant's eyes, the unnatural way his voice seemed to slither through the air. He stepped forward. "You speak of power, but there is none in your hands," Elias said, his voice calm but unwavering. "Your trinkets are nothing but stones and wood, painted with lies." The merchant paled. "How dare you question me?" he spat, but his hands trembled. The villagers turned to Elias, confusion in their eyes. Some hesitated, suddenly uncertain of the items they had so eagerly purchased. A woman clutched a necklace to her chest, as if it had turned to dust in her hands. Elias did not need to argue. Truth had a way of unraveling deception on its own. One by one, the villagers laid down their purchases and walked away, leaving the merchant exposed. He snarled at Elias, his face twisting in rage. "You ruin me, boy," he hissed. "Men like you should not meddle in the affairs of others." Elias only watched as the man fled into the night. It was always the same. Those who thrived on deception feared being seen for what they truly were. Later that night, Elias met an elder of the village, a wise woman named Miriam, who had known his grandfather well. She studied him carefully, then said, "Your sight is both a gift and a burden. You see things as they are, not as they pretend to be. But tell me, child, do you yet know what to do with such a gift?" Elias hesitated. "I have seen the truth behind men's words. I have exposed deception. Is that not enough?" Miriam shook her head. "Discernment is more than exposing falsehood. It is also about guiding others toward truth. Many can see what is wrong, but few can reveal what is right." Elias listened carefully, her words settling deep into his soul. It was not enough to merely unmask deceit. He had to help others find the path of wisdom and light. Discernment was not just about vision, it was about action. The following days, Elias traveled through the village not as an accuser, but as a teacher. He showed the people how to listen, how to see beyond mere appearances. He spoke of wisdom, of the need to seek truth not in the words of men, but in the voice of God that whispered in the stillness of their hearts. And so the boy who once stood alone became a beacon for his people. Those who sought truth came to him, and those who feared exposure shrank away. But Elias was no longer troubled by their hatred, for he knew that to walk in the light meant casting shadows behind him. And that was a price he was willing to pay: the unshakable foundation. In a time when truth had become a marketable commodity, where men swayed like reeds in the wind at the mere whisper of influence, there arose a man who could not be bought. His name was Elias, a wanderer with neither land or title, but whose words carried the weight of eternity. He spoke not in riddles, nor in the polished rhetoric of philosophers, but with a clarity that pierced through deception like a sword through mist. Elias walked into the city where the rulers trafficked in lies, weaving illusions that bound men to fear. They had long abandoned truth, shaping laws that twisted morality, rewarding those who could best manipulate the weak. Yet Elias feared no man, for his foundation was not in gold or approval, but in the unshakable rock of the Almighty. One evening, as he stood in the public square, a young merchant approached, his eyes sharp with calculation. "Teacher," he said, "tell me, how does one gain true power?" Elias looked upon him and smiled. To gain true power, one must first surrender. The merchant scoffed. "Surrender? To whom?" "To the one who is above all power. To the one who spoke before the mountains were formed. For the man who kneels before God stands taller than any king." A murmur passed through the crowd, for such words were dangerous. The rulers feared them, knowing that a man untethered from earthly chains cannot be controlled. And so they devised a test, a trap to expose Elias as a fraud. The next day they summoned him before the tribunal. A nobleman, draped in robes of crimson, spoke. "Elias, you speak of truth, yet you defy the wisdom of the elders. Do you not know that truth is what we say it is, that the will of the people shapes right and wrong?" Elias gazed at him, unshaken. If men shape truth, then it is no truth at all. A river may change its course, but the mountain does not move. The word of the Lord endures forever. The nobleman's lips curled in contempt. "Then let us see if your God will save you." They seized Elias, dragging him to the city's outskirts, where the ground was dry and barren. There, a great pit had been dug, deep and dark. "Deny your words," the nobleman said, "and we will spare you. Tell the people that truth is fluid, that we are the makers of wisdom." Elias stood at the pit's edge, but his heart was steadfast. The wind howls, but the oak does not bow. You may throw my body into the depths, but my soul is beyond your grasp. Furious, they cast him down. Yet as he fell, the earth trembled. A light brighter than the noonday sun erupted from the pit. The people gasped, shielding their eyes. When the light faded, Elias was gone. For days the rulers searched, but he was never found. Yet his words remained, spreading like fire. Once afraid, the people began to question, resist, and turn their hearts toward the unseen kingdom. The rulers had tried to silence a man, but they had only given voice to a truth that could not be buried. For truth is not a whisper to be stifled. It is a roaring tide, unstoppable, eternal, and those who stand upon it shall never be moved. Unbreakable spirit, the chosen who cannot fall. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, carrying whispers of fear and defiance. In the city's heart stood a man whose very presence unsettled the powerful. He was no warrior, nor did he wield the weapons of men, yet kings trembled at his words. His name was Yeshua, and he walked with an authority that no chains could bind. A young woman named Miriam watched with quiet awe among the crowd that gathered. She had known suffering born into a family that had lost everything to Roman taxes. She had seen her father break under the weight of oppression. But this man, this teacher, spoke as if suffering had no power over him. He spoke of a kingdom not built by hands, a kingdom where the weak were strong and the weary were lifted high. His words did not just inspire, they unsettled. They turned the world upside down. That night, Miriam sat beside her father in their small home. "Abba, do you believe he is the one? The Messiah?" Her father's face, weathered by years of hardship, remained unreadable. If he is, then the world will not tolerate him. And indeed it did not. The days passed, and the murmurs in the streets grew louder. The religious leaders whispered of blasphemy. The Romans spoke of rebellion. And then, the unthinkable, he was taken, betrayed by a friend, bound in chains, and dragged before rulers who feared the truth he carried. Pilate washed his hands, and the crowds once filled with awe now cried for blood. Miriam stood in the throng as he bore the weight of the cross. She saw the lashes on his back, the thorns pressed into his brow. This was suffering in its rawest form, the kind that should break a man. Yet, even as he staggered, there was something unbroken in him. The world had done its worst, and he did not crumble. At Golgotha, the sky darkened as the nails were driven into his flesh. The earth shook, and then the words that should have been despair rang out defiantly, "It is finished." Finished. Miriam felt the words settle over her like a question and an answer. How could this be an ending when it felt like the world itself was shifting? 3 days later, the whispers turned to gasps. The tomb was empty. The grave had failed. And suddenly all the fear, all the power of Rome, all the weight of oppression seemed like shadows fleeing before the dawn. Miriam found her father at the city gates, staring into the sky. "Abba, do you see?" He was not defeated. Her father, who had known only the bitterness of a broken world, let the weight fall from his shoulders. "No, Miriam, he was never meant to be. For those chosen, hardship is not an end but a refining fire. The world may press, but it cannot break them. The darkness may come, but it cannot consume them. And those who stand unbroken will always threaten the kingdoms of men, for they belong to a greater kingdom, one that no chains, crosses, or empires can ever destroy. Agents of transformation, the ones who disrupt the world. In every age, there arise individuals who do not merely accept the world as it is, but challenge its deepest foundations. They are not here to conform, but to transform. They walk among us, often unnoticed at first, but their presence disrupts the old order, forces others to confront their stagnation, and calls forth something greater. The prophets of old, the apostles of Christ, and even Christ himself stood in defiance of the established patterns of their time, not for the sake of rebellion, but to awaken those who had fallen into slumber. One such man was Elias, a humble craftsman from a forgotten village, whose hands shaped wood by day and hearts by night. From childhood, he saw the world differently. Where others saw customs, he saw chains. Where they saw tradition, he saw a refusal to seek truth. The elders warned him not to ask too many questions, but Elias could not silence the voice within that whispered, "What if there is more?" One evening, an old traveler came to the village, speaking of a kingdom not built by human hands. "It is already here among you," he said, "but you do not see it because your eyes are fixed on shadows." The words burned within Elias like a flame. He had sensed this truth before but had never dared to speak it. The next morning he left his village, compelled to seek the kingdom the traveler had spoken of. As Elias journeyed, he encountered many who clung tightly to their way of life. He met a priest in one town who guarded the temple laws with iron discipline, but had long since forgotten why they were written. "These laws have stood for centuries. They are unchanging," the priest said. "And yet the people's hearts remain unchanged," Elias replied. "Can an unlit lamp bring light simply by standing in its place?" In another place, he met a merchant who hoarded wealth while his neighbors went hungry. "Prosperity is a sign of divine favor," the merchant proclaimed. Elias looked him in the eye and asked, "Then what of the poor? Are they cursed? Or do you simply refuse to see your responsibility to them?" The merchant turned away, unwilling to answer. With every encounter, Elias found himself more at odds with the world. But he also found those who had begun to awaken, those who felt the weight of the old ways but feared to speak against them. "You are not alone," he told them. "The kingdom is for those who hunger for something greater." It was not long before Elias' words reached the ears of those who preferred ignorance and control. The rulers and teachers of the land grew uneasy. "He is dangerous," they said. "He unsettles the people." They sent men to silence him, but Elias did not resist. "You can bind my body," he told them, "but the truth has already taken root in the hearts of those who listen, and truth cannot be chained." As he stood in the prison cell that night, a voice came to him, "Clear as the morning light, you have done well, my servant. The seeds have been planted. Now let them grow." And Elias, knowing his time had come, rested in peace. The rulers thought they had won. But as the years passed, Elias' words spread farther than they could have imagined. The people he had touched carried the message onward. The kingdom that was already among them began to take form not in palaces or laws, but in hearts transformed by truth. This is the nature of those who challenge the status quo. They do not seek comfort. They do not pursue approval. They are feared, opposed, and often rejected. Yet through them, the world is changed, not by force, but by a call that cannot be ignored. They are the agents of transformation, reminding us that the kingdom is always near, waiting for those who dare to see it. The catalyst's call. Nathanael had always been an ordinary man, or so he believed. He was a quiet carpenter, his hands rough from years of shaping wood, his heart content in the simplicity of his craft. Yet in the depths of his soul, there was a whisper, a voice that stirred when the world was still. He did not understand it, nor did he wish to. But the call of awakening is seldom ignored forever. One evening, as the sun cast its last golden rays upon the earth, Nathanael found himself wandering beyond the village, past the olive groves, where the wind carried secrets from the heavens. There, at the edge of the world as he knew it, he saw a man robed in white, standing beneath an ancient tree. His eyes held the depth of eternity, and his voice was like thunder wrapped in gentleness when he spoke. "You have been chosen." Nathanael's heart pounded. Chosen for what? To awaken the slumbering. "I am no prophet," Nathanael protested. "I am a carpenter." The man smiled. So was he. Something within Nathanael stirred at those words, a memory not his own, yet familiar. He saw fishermen leaving their nets, tax collectors forsaking their ledgers, the blind seeing, the lame walking. The weight of their calling pressed upon him. "But why me?" he whispered. The man's gaze softened. "Because you listen." That night, Nathanael returned home troubled. The world he had known now seemed a shadow of something greater. When he spoke of his experience, many laughed, some scoffed, and others turned away. His closest friend, Elias, looked at him with pity. "Nathanael, you are chasing dreams," Elias said. "The world does not change because of one man's vision. Did not Moses change a nation? Did not the prophets stir the hearts of kings? And what of him, the one who walked among us?" Elias shook his head. Those were different times. Or perhaps Nathanael said, they were only waiting for men to believe. Days turned to weeks, and Nathanael's words spread like embers in the wind. Some came to listen, others to silence him. The comfortable feared the call to awaken, for with awakening comes self-reflection, and with self-reflection comes change. But the truth has a way of taking root where the soil is willing. One night, as Nathanael walked alone, a group of men confronted him. Their leader, a man of influence, stepped forward. "You stir unrest," he said. "People question their ways, their security, their purpose. Do you not see the danger in this?" Nathanael met his gaze. Is it danger, or is it truth? The truth unsettles. Then perhaps we were never settled to begin with. The leader sighed. "Turn back, Nathanael. Let men sleep." But he could not. For once the soul has glimpsed the light, darkness is never the same. And so he continued through rejection, through trials, through fear. Some awoke, some resisted. Yet even those who turned away could not forget the sound of his voice, the echo of something they had long buried. One day, years later, an old friend found him. It was Elias, his face weathered, his eyes different, like a man who had walked far only to realize he had been lost all along. "You were right," Elias admitted. "It is not the world that must change first, but the hearts of men." Nathanael smiled. "And now you are awake." Elias nodded. "What must I do?" Nathanael clasped his friend's hand. "Do what I did. Speak, walk, live." For the call of awakening is not given to one alone, but to many, and through them the world is never the same. The weight of divine authority. It was said that when Elias spoke, men trembled, not because he shouted, nor because his voice was deep and thundering, but because his words carried a weight beyond human reckoning. They were not his own, they were given to him. And when he walked through the streets of the city, the rulers and merchants, the scribes and scholars, all turned their gaze away, as if afraid to meet the eyes of one who had seen beyond the veil of this world. One day, as Elias entered the market, a commotion erupted near the temple steps. The high priest, adorned in flowing robes, stood before the people, his arms raised. He spoke in measured tones of law and tradition, of the weight of sacrifices and the necessity of obedience. The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding as if bound by unseen chains. Then, from the edge of the crowd, Elias spoke. "You speak of law," he said, his voice calm yet unwavering, "but have you forgotten its purpose? The law was given that men might know righteousness, not that they might be crushed beneath its weight. You add burdens upon the weary and call it obedience, but the one who gave the law desires mercy more than sacrifice." The silence that followed was thick, charged with something beyond mere words. It was as if a truth too long buried had forced its way to the surface, demanding to be heard. The high priest's face darkened. "You presume much, Elias. Do you claim to speak for God?" Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "It is not I who speak, but he who sends me, and his truth is not bound by tradition, nor contained in the words of men who seek power over others." A ripple of fear passed through the gathered crowd. They had heard many speakers before, prophets and zealots alike, but none like this. There was no uncertainty in Elias' words, no need to persuade or prove. He spoke as one who knew, and that knowing was undeniable. The rulers feared him. They whispered in dark corners, scheming and plotting, for they knew that authority like his could not be bought, bribed, or broken. It was not drawn from titles or positions, but from the divine wellspring. A man who feared nothing but God could not be controlled, which terrified them. One evening, a group of soldiers came to him in secret. Their leader, Marcus, removed his helmet and knelt before Elias. "I have heard your words," he said, "and they burn within me like fire. I have spent my life serving those who serve themselves, enforcing laws that do not bring justice. Tell me, Elias, what must I do?" Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stand for truth, even when it costs you everything. Speak only what is right, even when silence is safer. The authority of men fades, but the authority of God endures. Walking with him in danger is better than standing with kings in comfort. The next day Marcus removed his armor and laid down his sword. He walked among the people, no longer as an enforcer of earthly power, but as a servant of something greater. And though many would call him a fool, those with eyes to see knew the truth. He had found the only authority worth following. As for Elias, he continued to speak, though threats loomed and dangers grew. But the more they tried to silence him, the stronger his voice became. Divine authority does not shrink before men's fears. It does not falter before their schemes. It stands unshaken, burning like a flame that cannot be extinguished. And so the rulers and the powerful trembled, not because Elias was mighty, but because he was not afraid. And a man who fears only God is the most dangerous kind of man in the world.